Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Claude Sherrod here from African Media Australia, and we're here again on this edition of African Knowledge. Tonight, we'll be talking about African mindset. This is a series that we started 2 weeks ago. So every Friday night, we will be having a discussion in relation to the African mindset. Why? Why? Because it is important for us to look at our own ways of thinking and behaving and acting and see if I suppose we can improve it in some ways if we can accelerate. In order for us to accelerate our own self development and community or country development, it's important that we look into what is it that is playing in our mindsets and contributing to how we think, how we work, how we behave, and interact with others. So I've got with me tonight Barry Mustafa and James Lojogo. And now they're sort of regular now. This is the third time for Barry and second from James, but it's still a good idea because you may not know them. They'll still introduce themselves quickly, so we go into the topic. Thank you for your time, gentlemen, to African Knowledge. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Clyde. Thanks for having me. Yes, my name is Mustafa Bari. I am a resident of Melbourne, a member of the African community. Been in the country for a long time, for more than 20 years now, and conversations around Africans and African cultures or African identity, something that I'm really passionate about. So happy to be here and to have this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Hi. My name is James Lojogo. I'm originally from South Sudan, from the southern town of Kajukeji, close to the Ugandan border. So, as you would imagine, I've grown up in both sides of the border. I've also traveled quite a bit. So, in Australia, I've lived here for about 13 years. But otherwise, I've lived in South America as well as in the US, with about a combination of up to about 10 years in those two continents. And the entire time I have been traveling, I've taken a lot of interest in Africanness, like Barry, in our identity, our cultures. I felt like every time I traveled, I actually learned more about the African continent from outside.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. So we'll be talking about African culture, African mindset, and modernity. That's kind of the three key words that we'll be discussing today. First, let's just look at the word culture itself. It seems to me that a lot of times when we talk about culture, at least in many of our African circles, we tend to focus more on the aesthetic aspect of culture, the dancing, the food, the music, and all that sort of thing. And we talk less about the philosophical, the cognitive, the moral and values aspect of culture. Do you agree with that description?
I personally agree. I think the definition and description of culture is most of the time truncated because culture is actually bigger and more vast than the aspects, the folkloric aspect of it. When you're talking about culture, for me, it's a set of habits, a set of kind of rituals, a set of ways of doing things, of ways of a set of values that characterize a society or a group of people. So it's not only kind of about the music and about dancing. It's way bigger and more than that. So I agree with you, and there is a spiritual side of it too. So and
Absolutely.
the philosophical side. So everything basically we do every day got a maximum of it is made of kind of cultural aspects, and that's something that is most of the time ignored. So and that's a shame.
James.
Yeah, like Barry, I completely agree. I think when we talk of multiculturalism, we say we want to see the food, we want to see the dance, and we want to see the music, and they are beautiful things. I do enjoy dancing a lot. I don't know how to sing, but I enjoy other people singing. But on that, like Barry as well, culture does go a little bit deeper, or even the whole idea of an African identity goes a little bit deeper than that. So today I was thinking about, what is it that makes us us? And I thought and especially given that we're talking about, mindset. What is it that forms our mindset? The last time we talked about history, and let's put that aside. But I was thinking, like, what else? What else is there? And I came to the realization that we got about five things that are kind of really important in an African identity, and part of it is It's about connectedness, the connectedness of about five elements, right? And like in Western society, we think of culture, philosophy, religion, and all that as separate things. In the African mindset, they're all very connected, and the connected things are, nature, and then there is the ancestors, and then there's spirituality, and then there is the cultural, the rituals and all that, and then the last one is of course the self, and community. It's related with community. They're all very interconnected in terms of African mindset and thinking and culture.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this: what are some of the key features or tenets of the African culture that you would raise? I guess what you've said there, James, would sort of be an answer to that question. But Barry, what comes to your mind if somebody asks you, give me five five tenets or main element of the African culture? And we have to also clarify that obviously Africa is not one country. There's not really one culture. There are lots of cultures in Africa, but there seems to be some commonalities across the countries, especially in the sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah.
So we're doing some generalization here just to make clear what we're doing.
Well, look, yes, I think really you put me on the spot there, because to come up with some five just kind of tenets of culture, of African culture in general, it would be kind of a little bit kind
Difficult.
of I think not only difficult. I can list five. I can list, but to me, like, definition of culture is not about aspect that you can count. There are so many immaterial aspects of culture. So, like I said before, it's a set of things. Like, you take habits, it's one tenet of culture. Um, um, you take attitudes, it's one tenet of culture. So the way we behave, like with when particular situations happen, so that's the attitude. And you take also aptitude, our ability to live and to connect with the environment, to adapt to the environment and to make the environment work with us and to work in conjunction and in connection with the environment. Okay, that's the aptitude. The environment is very, very important, and I will come back to that later. So you have, and then you have basically the other aspects. So you have the aptitude, and you have also the way of thinking. The way of thinking. How do we think the world? How do we kind of explain the situation or the phenomena that are happening around us? So that's also aspects also environmental. And then you have the spiritual concept. It's very important to highlight here, as Africans, the spiritual context is very, very, very important, because as African, our ethos is actually linked to spirituality. We have, I think, not only because historically we are such an ancient civilizations, but the other thing also, you cannot take away the spiritual aspect from Africans. All the African societies have a spirituality that is deep in everything that they do. We do have so many varieties of cultures and interpreting the way we connect with nature, and how we invented the principle of polytheism and also of monotheism. We shouldn't forget that all the modern religions that we know today, although we think that they actually have been imported, like coming to us, but in actual fact, those religions will actually have taken root in Africa first before going somewhere else and getting kind of change and came back to us. Those religions, if you take all the modern religion, they have, in a way or another, kind of their origin in Africa, and that's probably another debate that we'll be having. We can go back to ancient Egypt and see how spirituality has developed over there, going from the heart of the African continent and spreading somewhere everywhere around the world. So yeah, these are the tenet of culture that I probably can
Think
list
of.
there. And the
Yeah.
last tenet that is very important is the historical consciousness. It's very, very important. That is also part of culture. How all these values that we have, how do we put them together and put that in our part of our memory and understand that this is who we are, this is the way we're looking at, this is how our history, this is how our past used to be. It's very important to have that as well. That's also part of culture. So historical consciousness is also an important part of what the cultural being is. So they are the one that I probably can list, and probably is too vast, but they are the
Yeah.
5 tenets that I can put there.
Absolutely, it's a pretty broad question, but certainly I can relate to what you're saying in terms of trying to find only a 5 out of a myriad of tenets that can be highlighted. James, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was gonna talk, like, add to the idea of the environment and how we relate to it. Um, and it's true. Like, for example, when we look at, and it could be the natural environment where, for example, when you're an African who's grown up in the desert, you're gonna have a different way of looking at the world. You have different ways of doing things, and so it does have that connection. But Barry also talked about the idea of spirituality and how on the African continent actually, um, the whole idea of Christianity basically, a lot of African societies do believe in a similar God and similar natural being, that it's a supernatural power that affects the present, the lives of the living, and that the living do interact with that
The
supernatural
dead,
power, and in terms of the dead, and but also
nature.
God Himself. Yeah,
Yeah.
God Himself, where there are mediums through ritual, through not necessarily prayer, but there's through ritual and offerings.
Mm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, I do agree, obviously, that there are lots of things that relates to culture, and it may be difficult to sort of corner ourselves to just one particular thing. But for the purpose of this conversation tonight, we will be talking more about culture, mindset, and modernity, and we'll think more about the actual cognitive thinking, the philosophical aspect of culture. That's where we're going to try to dwell a little bit onto, and then put a link between that and our mindset and how we are sort of adapting to today's world. Now, somebody told me that the African culture tend to be a little bit rigid, more rigid than perhaps the Western culture or even other culture that have incorporated a lot from other cultures, and ours tend to be a little bit rigid. Do you agree with that point of view?
Um, if
Go
I
ahead,
can
Jen.
jump in,
Yeah.
I actually disagree. I disagree. Uh, part of it is that, something we didn't mention earlier, is that apart from Egypt and a few other societies in Western Africa who had script and they wrote things down, a lot of African communities and societies developed through oral tradition. When Barry talked about histories and stories. All those were being told, but most of these stories were told from one generation to another. Uh, what I also know is that some of these stories change along the way. They, I'm hearing
Yep, echo.
echo. Yeah.
Yep.
So we because of it's an oral tradition, it does change with context. People do add to the stories, and the stories actually change with time. And I feel that even the values in those stories do change. There are of course some aspects of our cultures that stay the same. So, for example, the idea of community and belonging, and yeah, so the idea of belonging, the idea of community, the idea of service to others, some of those things stay the same. So
Yeah.
up to now, for example, people in Australia, you will be surprised how much assistance they're actually channeling to people at home, and sometimes includes people who are like not even related, and not we don't call them
Mm,
family, but
mm.
we still extend a hand of help to others. And I think those are some of the things that stay the same.
Barry, agree or disagree about rigidity of African culture in general?
No, cultures cannot be rigid. I think there is no kind of rigidity, but in actual fact, I probably would say Africans are probably the more African cultures are the more kind of open to evolution and to borrowing from others. Okay, so we cannot talk about rigidity if we have actually embraced Islam, we have embraced Christianity, we have embraced so many other different values and all that. In actual fact, I don't think um, uh, there is other cultures that is more open and more susceptible to borrowing from others, accepting from others than African cultures. Maybe that's a strength, but at the same time, it can be a weakness too.
But let me, so sorry to interrupt there. When you say we've embraced Islam and Christianity, some can argue that we actually have not really purposefully and willfully embraced these religions. They were kind of brought to us and kind of imposed by the foreigners on our land. And I see a lot of discussions nowadays
Yes.
on the internet where people are
Mhm.
arguing about this, calling for people to go back to our roots rather than continue to embrace these foreign, spiritual
Yes.
values. What do you think?
No, you see, like there are so many different ways that things can be brought to you. It can be brought to you by force. It can be brought to you by negotiation. It can be brought to you by exchanges. It can be so many aspects. Now, the way Christianity and Islam and other probably religions have come to the continent are very different. They didn't all come through violence and through imposition. But even if they did, but in actual fact, that was yesterday. And today, if you look at it, we have actually adopted in many, many parts of the continent, we have adopted this religion based on our own terms. Okay, we haven't completely relinquished our own values, but we accepted a lot of aspects of Islam and Christianity. The way we practice Christianity and Islam in our continent is very different from the way it's practiced in societies of the Middle East or in Europe. So, which means we have actually mixed those religions with some aspects of our own cultural values. So we have accepted on our own terms. So that's to me that's a very important aspect to say. Islam, as we know it, the way it's practiced in our countries, is different to the Islam that have come to us in the 10th or 9th century. It's or 11th century is absolutely not the same thing. The same thing with Christianity. If you take Christianity in the Congo and other parts of Africa, the way people, the local population have accepted Christianity was very, very different. If you take, for example, in Congo, both Congos and all that, you have people have come up with their own concept on how to reinvent the Christianity in a way that they can be acceptable to them. They invented concept with the Kimbangism, with
Yeah,
so many other kind of prophets that came and actually rethought the religion in a different aspect. So people have embraced it. Today,
absolutely.
if you take it today, for example, both Congos, I think among the most spiritual people in Africa are the Congolese people. Why? Because of that actually syncretism that these people 200 years ago have reinvented, and that did help. And the same thing with Senegal and where I come from, where we have accepted Islam, but we actually instilled a style or Sufism in it that is very different, but that is very, very proper to ourselves, to our own values. So we accepted all these religions based on our own terms, and that's very important to say. To me, it's not important anymore whether it has been imposed by force or whatever, but what have you made out of it? We recreated something different to what we have been given before, and that's, I think, it's an element of creativity that needs to be highlighted.
It's true,
Okay,
true.
James.
No, I completely agree with Barry. And an example of some of those things that have remained that we have Africanized. For example, the Catholic Church. They when they came, I think they were able to link with the African continent and peoples because they tried to use the local knowledge and incorporated it into their own rituals. So, for example, the use of the drum. The drum is in worship and hymns. It's typically African. And then you go to a Catholic church, they will see them playing the drum, and it's actually the local ones that the local people use. They bring it back into the church. The other bit is like even songs, and I know, for example, in Europe, like the Christian songs are very slow and kind of very not emotional, very sorrowful, very I don't know how to describe it better, but you go to an African church right now, and it's the same in the African American churches. It's like a disco. People
Very
want
live.
energy. Yeah, a lot of energy, a lot of vibrancy, and
Yeah,
people want to dance. People want to sing and jump up. All those are African elements being incorporated into Christianity as well.
absolutely. Okay. Now, I guess it can be argued that when it comes to modernity, we're still quite behind as a people in Africa. Have we failed to catch up with modernity because potentially that there are some things in our ways of thinking or seeing the world, or that
Mm,
is potentially linked to that?
mm. I probably would ask the question back, what do we mean by modernity? Because to me, when we talk about modernity and how we lagging behind in modernity, my question is modernity in regards to what? In modernity in comparison to what and to whom?
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I think you need to, where is the benchmark? Where do we the benchmark where we decide this is modernity? Well, that's why it should look like, this is the way it should look like. That's my question to people who think that way.
Okay, but then just to give you a bit more element into that sort of argument, because I'm just presenting the argument and see what that brings to your mind. We can define modernity in many ways, but I can just take two elements out of that. For example, economic development and um, technological innovation. If you look at these two things, not many have come from Africa. Africa is pretty much taking the technology invented elsewhere to adapt. And in terms of economic development, we're still a bit behind. Many of our countries still have very very economical, very serious economical issues, and the population is not still not even having enough food to eat, all that sort of thing. So if we throw those two things as some of the elements that go into the concept of modernity, quote unquote, how would you respond with regards to the argument that we're still falling behind?
I wouldn't respond to that in that way. I would probably look at it in a different way. I would say, okay, when we talk about contribution to what this world has become today, and just kind of using the final product and say, okay, this is the way modernity looks like. What was your contribution to it? You haven't invented that. I would say I would actually have an issue with that, because at the end of the day, the logic that have brought to the computer is not a logic that started only yesterday. There are a set of kind of ideas and set of kind of initial thinking, thoughts, and all that have come to the conclusion of that. Now, saying that Africans haven't contributed to that, I think that no, it's not true. Because if you take mathematically speaking, mathematics have started in Africa, and a lot of other aspects as well. Our societies have contributed in many ways into bringing about a lot of things that we have today. Maybe not directly, but indirectly. I'm talking about the mathematics. Like if you take mathematicians like the Pythagoras theorem and all the things that we said that were invented by Greek thinkers and all that have proven to be untrue, because they all come from Egypt. A lot of the theorems that we use today have their origin in the African continent. And if I jump even to more recent past, if you take a lot of the invention that we have, they actually, not even if it's not directly African, but you have children of Africa have contributed to a lot of the things. When you take traffic lights, when you take a lot of other concepts and all that, the mobile phones in telecommunication and all that, Africans or children of the African continent have contributed to that. So I take like an issue in saying that we haven't contributed to anything. Yes, we are poor. Yes, we do have kind of a lot of issues that we need to address. Yes, that's true. We have been subject to colonization and to violence for centuries and centuries. But saying that we haven't actually been contributors to anything at all, I would say no, absolutely, it's not true. And the other aspect that we need to look at is also culturally speaking. You take the music. In terms of music, what is there in terms of music today that doesn't have the stamp of the Africa of the African continent or African cultures? There is not. You know, if it wasn't for Africa, you wouldn't have jazz, you wouldn't have R&B, you wouldn't have so many things that people are enjoying today. So here, that is another card that shows the contribution of our continent to what we call modernity today. And we
Okay.
shouldn't ignore that.
Sure. James?
True, true. No, I was about to mention the idea of culture, and part of it, like when, for example, I mentioned my experience in South America, really because I noticed a lot of Africanness, whether it's in the foods that they eat, whether it's in the music, the dances. A lot of it was influenced by Africans. Samba is influenced by an African connection. We're
Tango.
talking about pop, rock, merengue. We're talking about rumba. Rumba is an interesting one, which is mostly seen from Congo, but it started in Cuba by Africans, and then they brought it back and then connected with Congo, and now we've established that connection with our brothers and sisters in Cuba. But generally speaking, when you look at music, there's no other continent that has contributed to world music more than the African continent.
And
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I would add to that, Clyde. I would add to
I
that.
just
That
Barry,
that
before you do add to that, I'll add something that you can also respond. For example, when you talk about music, I see a lot of arguments where they say, okay, Africans are good at things like music and sports. They are gifted at these things, but when it comes to technological innovation and these other things, they don't seem. It's not like that we haven't contributed, but
Mhm.
it's that the contribution has been very minimal. And
That's
and
not that's absolutely people who would say that. I would say it's not true. That's also is not true. The fact that people don't know or they're ignorant of what we have done doesn't mean that we haven't done anything at all. If you take, I would start with the music. Like I said earlier, there is no place in the world today where you can go, whether it's a nightclub, whether it's entertainment, whether it's in the people houses, where you can't, where there is no contribution of Africa in the music and everything that people are hearing. There is not. But today, our influence, our cultural influence, is flowing all the way from Africa, all the way to Japan and Korea and all that. All those people have adopted or are adopting. The young people are adopting a lot of the things that we have, whether it's the style of dancing, style of music, and everything. That's what Africa has given to the world. Now, if you talk about architecture and and all that, well, people have to go to Africa to see what innovation in terms of culture, architecture, and all that our people have done. And you take it even in the olden days, before colonization, there are multitude of historical sites that are there that the Europeans have come and have sometimes destroyed, have sometimes left as it is. That's showing actually the greatest architects in ancient era are Africans. If you take the Benin, in Benin, we're talking about the Great Wall of China and everything and all that. If you go to the Empire of Benin, that is in today Nigeria, you would see that there are actually great walls or walls have been actually built there that are older than the wall of China, that are actually bigger, longer, and everything that are there. And you're talking about style of architecture, style of buildings and everything. We have invented a lot of things. Style of irrigation, you know method of agricultural method of cultivating rice and all that. We have developed things like that for centuries and centuries before anyone else, thousands of years before anyone else. Now, the fact that this has been degraded, downgraded by colonization and our government that don't have the foresight to actually uplift all the things doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. People have to dig deeper. They need to go to academia and check. People who know can't throw that on our face because they know it's not true. You know, I don't have that problem personally. I don't have that problem. I am I know that what my people, the Africans, have contributed to. I know what I'm capable of. They're talking about technology or science and all that. Personally, myself, I don't have that complex because I know I am in the area of science. I'm in telecommunications, and I know that I've been in the industry for more than 25 years. And absolutely, I am not a beggar when I'm doing that. I know my stuff, and people respect me, whether it's my work or even internationally. I have done things that I'm proud of, and I know many Africans who have done the same thing. You know, and you just look around us, and we will see that we as Africans, we have a lot to be proud of. Absolutely, a lot to be proud of.
Yeah,
Yes,
even
James.
most recently, I read an article. Apparently, it was a journal written by a British explorer who had gone to the border of Uganda and Rwanda. What he said he observed was that the local people were performing a C-section, basically performing an operation to get a baby out of the tummy, and then stitching that with iron rods, and then putting in anesthetics, yeah, to heal. And that the operation was successful. That was the earliest record of any C-section that had ever been done before. At the moment, it's everywhere in in hospitals. It's being done all the time, but we did that already. And what I wanted to also mention is that, like a lot of times we had come up with ideas. These ideas get taken away and modified and then branded as if it's a completely new concept, even if we already had that in our space. And then the other element of like I'm talking about in terms of technology and economic development on the African continent, there is mechanisms that don't allow that to happen. So for example, there's control of capital flow, where there's like, if investors don't want to invest on the African continent, if you're an inventor, you could be the smartest person in the world, and if you're not being funded, because at the moment, of course, you can't start things from scratch. You need to be supported, and I think there is a lot of potential on that continent right now. An example of that is like the money transfer through mobile phones. That was started, I think, in Kenya, um, and that had never been done before. We're using the existing technology to our own advantage. On the African continent right now, you can pay things with mobile money. That is basically almost like digital money, you know.
Okay.
So the ideas are there. We do need investment, like, and we do need to invest in the local people, local knowledge, local experience, and try to see to market that outwards.
But why is it? I mean, I certainly get the points that you're saying, and I'm kind of playing the devil advocate here,
Yeah,
to trying to elicit some sort of deep thoughts on some of these issues that we don't always talk about, or maybe not sufficiently enough. I mean, the argument is not that Africa has not contributed to the development of technology or science or anything in the world. I mean, when you mention things like music, for example, one latest example is the Jerusalem song that has been sort of danced all over the world. That little tune from South Africa has just caught the whole world on fire. That's just one simple example. But having said that, we still have also to accept and acknowledge that, well, we could do a lot better than what we're doing now, in terms of how we can contribute not just to our own development for our own countries, but also on the international scene. So why is it that we're not actually doing that? I mean, we can argue about the leadership, we can argue about the colonization or neo colonization. Is there anything that we can reflect on from our own perspective and find out the things that we actually should change in our ways of thinking and ways of working and ways of doing things.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we need to market ourselves better. What we don't have is that we don't have the power of marketing, because maybe it's something that we haven't understood well enough. It's all about marketing. Really, you can do 1,000 things, but unless people know about it, you packet it in a way that people can kind of see it and accept it and absorb it. It doesn't count. You know, we have from the beginning of times, I think from a long time now, we have been lagging behind in terms of marketing ourselves. We don't market our kind of achievements well. We don't market even the way we're looking out. We see the world. We don't market the way we look at ourselves. We don't market even our food. You know, people around the world don't know what Africans eat. You know, and actually we got the best cuisines that we can imagine. Every single country in Africa, we have wonderful way of making food and stuff like that. The world doesn't know that. You know, the world doesn't know that. If we go to other countries, we left the African, we go to other countries, we try what other people eat, we realize in actual fact our food is actually better, you know, in many ways, but people don't know, you know. So I
Okay.
think that's also a legacy of colonization in many, many ways, but also it's a legacy of us not wanting to understand and to get rid of all the things that colonization has done to us. You know, where we actually lost the confidence of ourselves and the confidence of coming with what we can offer. You know,
And
that's
that
the problem.
actually, James, you may comment on that in a moment, but that leads me to the question where, for example, right now we have sort of looked deeply at how devastating the whole experience of colonization was, and how it continues in new forms, neo-colonization and imperialism on the international stage. But when you look at what's happening in our own countries, we are not having those serious conversations about how we should actually
Get rid
get
of,
things
yeah,
changed.
absolutely.
Why is that happening? Why, 21st century, 2000, and I mean 22, we're still not having those serious conversations about how we should repair the damage and allow ourselves to relaunch into a new journey of development.
Yeah, I completely agree with Barry in terms of marketing. I think we're not talking enough about our strengths. We're not talking enough about what we're capable of. We're not talking enough about some of the things that we're really, really proud of. And part of it is that, like I think Barry mentioned it in the last episode. He talked about us being brought up to be humble. That even if you're really, really good at something, you don't go around telling people how good you are, how well you do something. That you always have to be humble. Just keep doing what you're doing. But I think that kind of, that's something that I think we can work on. We need to be able to identify some of those things um, that we think are unique to us, and that's what we will market. The other challenge there, about not marketing what we're good at, is that we end up trying to sell the same thing that everybody else is doing. And an example of that is food. Like I gave you an example of the fast food um, growing on the African continent at the moment, because again there's a growing middle class, and so the food that they like to eat is the food that seems to be from the outside, instead of saying, and you go to the good hotels, that's what you're going to find. And so if somebody is coming from overseas and coming to the African continent, he goes in the five-star hotel and eats fried chicken and chips. We're not selling what we have. We think that we need to sell uh, European things to Europeans, but that's not it. Like when a European comes to Africa as a tourist, they are coming there to get the whole African experience. So let's market what we got. Um,
But
so yeah,
James,
basically, yeah,
sorry to interrupt, but isn't
yeah.
that in itself evidence of us not really reforming ourselves properly? Even though that
Yes, I.
shouldn't depend on the colonial past that we've had or anything like
Mm,
that. but we're still not even able to do that sort of thing, which means there's something wrong somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I personally, James, let me just
Yeah.
say this here.
Yeah.
I think, yes, I think it's something that that put that is something that actually show that there is a problem somewhere, and I agree there is a problem somewhere,
Yeah.
and I agree that we need to have these conversations, you know, as to why that. I think the fact that we have fast foods and all that, that's a worldwide phenomenon. You know, fast food has taken over every single society in the world. Now, the only difference is, have we been able to capture it, that opportunity, and repackage it in a way that is ours, just the same way we did with the religions.
Yeah.
You know, we are not doing that, because if you go to Thailand, for example, you go to a fast food, you go to KFC, for example, in Thailand, the taste, it doesn't taste the same way as KFC or other fast food if you go another country. They actually repackage it in a way that is actually taste like what they have, what they know in their culture locally. You know,
Yeah.
that's the value add that they put to it. Now, the fact that if you have kind of fast food in our countries, kind of coming into our countries, my question is, are we able, have we been able to take that and repackage it in a way that is ours, add value to it, you know? And that's actually what we need to do. We can't actually shield ourselves from everything that is happening or coming from the other parts of the world. But what we can do, we can take it and add value to it in instilling something that is our own, you know.
Mm.
And that's where the challenge is. I think our ancestors, our grandfathers did that very well, you know. But
Yeah.
if you take, for example, fashion and everything and all that, they did that very well. But with this, what we call like kind of the contemporary people that we are, do we have that creativity? Now, that's a question. That's what the conversation that we need to have. You know, those kind of
Exactly.
conversation, we need to have this conversation locally in our African societies, and we need to have these debates.
And I
Yeah.
suppose that need to have that debate about creativity also connects with technological innovation. It connects with economic development. So
Yeah,
because all of these things are products of creative minds,
yeah,
and we're kind of
and
lacking.
adapt it to our realities.
Exactly. I mean,
Yeah,
that creativity is not necessarily just doing the same thing like other countries do, but
yeah,
doing things that advance us in a way that also connects with the rest of the ecological considerations in our own environment.
yeah.
Yeah.
But the fact that we're not doing that, is it simply lack of leadership, or is there something deeper, James?
Yeah, I would think there's something deeper, and we've talked about some of this, and part of it is that I think we're not questioning, we're not asking questions. So, for example, and Barry put it really a lot more eloquently. So, if something is presented to us from the outside, we could ask ourselves, is this like, if we were to do this, how would it be, and is this the best version of what it can be? You know, like let's say and part of that is that it's connected, like we don't want to question the outside world too much. We think that it's the best version, so we'll just take it the way it is. But I feel like, yeah, we do need to question ideas. We do need to ask ourselves, how can we make this, what is here, or these ideas, or this product, how can we make it to suit our own needs and our own expectations, so that it speaks and expresses who we are, instead of saying, all right, here is the recipe, just put the chicken in, in the oil, and that's it. That you
Mhm.
can't, yeah.
All
So I
right, let
feel
me
there
just
is, we need to question, we need to explore.
absolutely. Let me
Yeah.
remind those watching us that you're watching African Knowledge on African Media Australia, and we're discussing tonight African culture, mindset, and modernity. We want to have a look at some of these things that are rooted deep in our culture, that are both positive and perhaps negative to some extent, that we may need to reform in order to advance our societies and communities. Um, Now, let me I suppose go into the academia and education, because that's also part of culture, how we reform our culture and how we internalize some of these things, because the way we teach our children at school, we educate professionals, we educate people to play different roles in the society, has a lot to do with culture. Now, when you look at that, I think we were talking about even last time, even in terms of the content of the actual curriculum, both at all levels of education, primary, secondary, and tertiary, we're still pretty much just taking what we get from the Western countries and not sufficiently incorporating our own knowledge in order to help us to reform our societies. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah. There's always this story that I tell my friends. At primary school, and I remember that really clearly because I didn't like the experience. My history teacher, for example, while we were doing history and we were talking about the exploration of the African continent, and the big question was who discovered the source of the Nile. Yeah. And they said it was some British guy, I think John Speke. That's what they said. He discovered the source of the Nile. And then I asked the teacher, I said, oh, if the Baganda people, the people of Uganda and the Basoga who are on the eastern side of the Nile were already living there, how can how can how can how comes it takes a British person to come and discover the source of the Nile?
And what about the
Yeah,
population? You mean the population who are living there?
exactly. So
Yeah.
people are there, they were fishing there, they knew there was a lake, and they know there is a river that flows that way. They don't know how far it goes probably, but they knew it was there. And so there was this thing where in at schools we are told to remember and not ask questions and not doubt things that are presented. And it's again goes back to the, for me, I think it goes back to the idea of asking questions. Is this, is like, who is telling this story? And is there alternative? Is there alternative facts? And I'm not talking alternative facts as in the recent, the most recent,
Definition of
elections,
that.
and yeah, that's not most recent one. But I'm talking about, well, somebody has called themselves the discoverer of this body of water. Is that true? For example, and what about the people who are living and fishing there and farming in the area? What do we call that? So for me, there has been a lot of erasure of the African of the African in history, in science, in a lot of things. But we do need to present that and say, by the way, we also know that that's not true. So we need to question, but also we need to learn. We need yeah, we need to look at ourselves and see and present our own stories. We shouldn't be letting somebody tell our stories and say they did that when we already did that. You
Mm.
know,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, I think yes. I think our education curriculum is definitely problematic. I don't know whether it's the case for the curriculum for every country, but if I take the country where I come from in Senegal, for example, um, we've been debating for a long time about the content of the curriculum. Um, the education system is in such a way that the outcome doesn't fit with the realities of what we have on the ground. So what I mean by that is that basically the education system is extroverted. So we can have degrees, you can be an engineer, or you can be like kind of an agronomical kind of specialist or whatever, but what you study there doesn't help you in terms of realizing or doing something that can be helpful to the people on the ground. You know, all what we actually studying is in connection to faraway lands. You know,
Mhm.
is because it's copied from a system that is not ours. You know, we talk about things like in history or geography, we talk more about Europe than we talk about Africa. We know more about kind of the history of Europe than the history of Uganda or the history of Nigeria and so on. So much so that actually as Africans, we are so extroverted, but we don't know much about each other, and that's a problem. It is a problem. If I am kind of a Senegalese, I know what the national anthem of France is. I know what the national anthem of Britain is. I know what the independence of the United States when it was. I know like the principal heroes of the Civil War and stuff like that. But I don't know anything about Uganda or about Zimbabwe or about other countries. And Zimbabweans and Nigerians don't know anything about me. I know what the French eat. I know what the Dutch eat. I know, but I don't know what actually the Nigerians and the Beninese and the Congolese, I don't know what they eat. It's a problem. It is a problem. We don't know much about each other. We don't know even much about the people who live in the same country and the province that is actually 500 kilometers away from me. It is a problem. So I think that's a thing that every kind of leadership and all that needs to look at very, very closely and see how we can remedy that. And it's a problem not only for one country, it's a problem of every country in Africa, and it has to be addressed.
All right, let me remind those watching, if you have a comment or question, please, we encourage you to post that. You can also call. If you want to call, the phone number is there on the screen, and you can make a comment if you want to. We would like to encourage people to participate and contribute to these discussions. James, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, what Barry said about us understanding about each other, so that people in Congo know who is in Uganda, so Ugandans know who is in Sudan. What that does is it actually facilitates trade. It makes trade so much easier. But at the moment, so for example, Ugandans and Kenyans might be treating each other like strangers. They're not strangers, they're neighbors. They should be trading with each other a little bit more instead of looking at saying, how do we connect, how do we sign deals with the European Union as Kenyans, instead of saying how do we trade between Uganda and Kenya, because that actually is a short distance. And second, we are exchanging among ourselves. You don't have to sign big deals that do not benefit the local people. A lot of times, like, we have agreements that are signed between these big, highly developed countries, big economies, with our small countries, but all the terms are dictated by them because they have the money, But we could do trade within the African continent itself, because we are also a big market, and we could come together and actually do these negotiations with the outside world as a unit, as a region, instead of as individual countries, and that understanding, the cultural understanding, the learnings that we can do among ourselves facilitates that.
And I suppose that's partly what the African Union has been trying to do. But again, when you look at the whole history of the African Union, it has been a disaster as far as I'm concerned. This organization, which were meant to sort of pick up on the Pan-Africanism idea left by Kwame Nkrumah and others, and develop that further, but they spend decades just being a talk fest of some sort. And now this is probably a political point. It has nothing to do with culture, but I suppose we can say, and actually, there's one point that I remember having a discussion with someone who was asking me, well, there are a lot of wars in Africa, a lot of civil wars, people fighting each other. Is that coming from the culture of Africans? What do you respond?
No, I don't think it's coming from the cultures of Africa. It comes from kind of the economic challenges that we're facing. That's all what it is, because every war is, at the end of the day, is economical. It's just a net of things. We are societies that are in formation. We are actually forming. We are actually in the process of reinventing ourselves, of reshaping ourselves. So it's normal that we have conflict. It's a part of a process of development. We are actually facing the challenges.
Too many conflicts, Barry.
Well, I don't say there is. I wouldn't say there is too many. There are too many that is being reported. Now, if you take in the big scale of things, we don't have that too many conflicts. I think we do have. Yes, there was a time when we did have many conflicts that was also imposed by the conditions of the time, where we had to fight for our liberation. We have to fight for our survival and all that. And all what I'm saying here is, regardless of what it is, how many conflicts, it got an economical kind of source more than anything else, rather than a culture. It does absolutely nothing to do with race or culture. It's something to do with economical contradiction that are being solved through non-political means. That's all what it is.
Okay. Well, we got about 5 minutes to go, and I want to use this 5 minutes to sort of look at some of the things that we can recommend, you and I, but mostly you guys, as you're the guest, on reforming our culture, and by that, and I know that definition of culture is quite broad, but if you want to make it simple, the way we think, the way we do things, the way we see the world, and act within it. What are some of the things that you would recommend, given the whole discussion that we've had about some of the things that we know maybe are not working, some of the things that perhaps we think they're not working, but they're actually there, and it's just that it's not as marketed properly. But if we want to sort of go into a solution mode, how do you start changing things? Where do we start, and how do we go about it?
I think for me, the first thing that is urgent for all of us, like I was actually started to saying earlier, the first thing that is critical for us to do is to reform the content of our education system. We need to have an education system that is centered around us and seeing how we can use the education system to develop our societies for us to go forward. And if that's fixed, that's going to be a very big win. The second thing, we need to restore confidence and in a people, when a creative people gather among us, give them the means and give them the confidence to reinvent our societies and to reinvent the environment, because they can, but if kind of the people who are actors of culture and all that are actually lurking in poverty and in survival, creativity sooner or later is going to die. So we need to put people who are kind of part of the creative industry to be in a position where they can reinvent things, where they can create, where they can kind of be part of contribution to society. People who are in the fashion, that are tailors, people who are kind of in the music and all that. We need to give them the opportunities to thrive and to develop things, to reinvent things. Once we do that, we will start seeing a lot of things that are different. So there's are the second. The third thing also, I think every single African country need to have a political and educational kind of strategy, so that we can like have something that is not compounded to one only kind of regime that is here for 5 years, and then after that we do have something that is long term, because those things are actually things that need to be developed long term and has to continue. Once we have an education system and a cultural strategy, we need to make sure that regardless who is going to come to power, they're going to continue the same policy, because that's what is good for our people. So that's my recommendations.
James?
Yeah, I think Barry has said most of the points really, but I want to emphasize the idea of confidence. We need to develop confidence in ourselves, in our ways of thinking, in our resources, and knowing knowing that we've got things that are that other people want. And so when it comes to whether it's because I think Africans are very generous people. Uh, and so when it comes to relationships with let's say trade relationships, culturally we are very generous. We just say, all right, we believe that somebody has got good intentions all the time. Like first and foremost, we think somebody's got good intentions. So but we do need to change. We need to be like I said earlier, we need to be asking questions. We need to ask questions around, well, what is in it for us as Africans when we're doing trade negotiations, when we are, dealing with, and it could be a service that is, whether it's brought through international humanitarians. Let's ask the questions: what is in it for us? Is this actually for us, or is it to make somebody's name sound great? Because I personally have seen many cases of what is now being termed white saviorism on the African continent. I'm not saying uh, people shouldn't do humanitarian work, but when internationals come to a country and they want to work with the local people, it will be like, for us as Africans, we need to be asking how, like, are we being consulted? Are we part of this conversation? Are we is this serving our interests as well. We want to be asking whose interest is it serving, and
But
what's the long term? Yeah.
I suppose as long as we remain weak, then somebody stronger would want to take advantage of us.
Yeah.
So the best defense is for us to to develop our own strength, so that we
Yeah.
can counter whatever willingness of exploitation. And we may as well want to. I mean, it's good that we can say we want to be part of the conversation, but if you don't have enough power to be part of that conversation, it's just a wish, isn't it?
No, absolutely. Let me throw something here. I think you mentioned the African Union earlier. I think if the African Union could be useful, could be made itself to be useful to have kind of a roadmap, or to have kind of a strategy that is going to be like kind of a template strategy for all those things. Because when we're talking about the interests of our people, a lot of people who are in the leadership don't understand what is the interest of our people. They actually confuse the interests of the people of their own interests with their own interests. So we need to have kind of, the African Union could be probably made itself useful by making sure that there is a template on how we can have a kind of, for each country to develop kind of a strategy for developing kind of in the area of natural resources, for example. When you're signing a contract with external superpowers and all that, what is the template you can use to negotiate in a way that is beneficial for your people? Is 10% acceptable? Is 3% acceptable? Is 20% acceptable? Or 80, 70%, and all that? To have a template, because many of those countries that go to negotiate with the contractors from overseas, they have no idea what they're negotiating. They absolutely have no clue. So they end up having kind of 10% or less than 10% of their own resources, but they don't realize that actually it's not a good deal. So I think the African Union could be made itself useful by making sure that they have a consultative, like a template that is here put together by consultant, and say, here is the benchmark of what is acceptable, what is not. Here is the template. This is what you need to take with you. And all Africans can use that and educate themselves. African countries can educate themselves, and when they go into negotiation, they at least they got something to work with. And you can do the same with the education sector. They can do the same with other sectors as well. So the African Union could be useful by making sure that they have a set of experts that in every area to sit down and put together a template and say, here is an example of what we can use to build a policy about our natural resources, policy around our education, policy around actually negotiating with the NGOs, policy around this, around this, around that. That would be like kind of a big win. Because at the moment, people who are in power have no clue. They have no clue absolutely of what they're doing.
And
absolutely.
There's a third element to that as well: intellectual property. On the African continent at the moment, it's very loose. You create something and anybody can create it. You don't have any way of reclaiming that intellectual property. I think we do need to start getting ourselves used to knowing that your something that you created is actually yours, and if somebody wants to copy or use that, they will have to ask your permission or even pay royalties. The example of that is the marimba, the thumb piano. Right now, you can buy the thumb piano for $5. Guess where it's made? Outside the country. For $5, you can buy that thumb piano.
Probably made by Chinese somewhere.
Exactly. So they're copying cultural artifacts. So culture is not just some intangible some. It is tangible. It's marketable. It's an economic good. So we need to think about intellectual property.
All right. So unfortunately, we're coming to the end of this show. Perhaps just one point I would mention, following for what Barry has said, for example, in relation to the role of the African Union. I've noticed that they're starting to actually do a few more things that they didn't used to do in the past, and including this free trade agreement that is being pushed forward, and the plan to build road from Cairo to Cape Town and all that sort of thing. But there's still in terms of communication, and Barry mentioned about marketing. That's absolutely crucial. The communication to market those ideas, to raise consciousness. I mean, to raise awareness and help people to understand what they are doing, so that they can get the population behind these initiatives, including the diaspora. I know there are a few initiatives here and there, but there's still very limited communication I mean, the communication strategy still has a lot to be improved, and that's something that is quite an issue. But unfortunately, we don't have much time anymore. We've run out of time. I just make a quick mention of Samuel Guy Gokuku's who has made a couple of comments. I think education system is not an excuse. Many African countries have adopted the Western education system while we are yet fighting one another. The reasons of fighting in Africa is benefit the Western world. Africa will be free until we form one language and united Africa to be one nation. Africa became our material to the Western. Okay, thank you for your comments and your participation to the show. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. We will continue this conversation next Friday. So we're gonna have this. This is a series of discussions on African mindset. And we will have about 3 more to go in this series. Perhaps depending on the feedback we get from people, we could continue if there's more to talk about. But ultimately, we want to encourage conversations and discussions around these key things that affect all of us. Barry, Mustafa, thank you very much for your contribution tonight. Thank you very much as well, James, for your time to African Knowledge. And those of you watching, please share the links, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and also click the notification bell so you are notified when we go live for more that is coming from us to you. Until next time, stay blessed and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Clyde. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
See you,
Cheers.
bye. See you,
So bye. 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 Thanks,
Bye.
bye.